Welcome back to A&N In Depth. This is a thought-provoking podcast that provides valuable insights from incredible scholars and leaders within the Adventist Church to help you understand who Seventh-day Adventists are, what is the structure like, what are the practices, what are the beliefs. Whether you're a lifelong Adventist or a curious listener, stick around. I'm your host, Neves, and this is A&N In Depth. Today, we are continuing the conversation with James Winegardner from Adventist Risk Management. He is the head of that organization. And last week, we talked about insurance. We talked about managing risk. And today, we're going to talk about child abuse, because this is one of the issues that James feels very passionately about, helping the church become better and better at minimizing the risk to zero to our churches and our children and our vulnerable adults in our various churches worldwide. So this conversation is a very sensitive one, and I hope that you follow through all the way to the end. There are two more subjects I want to talk to you about. Right. One is the spirituality of risk management. Right. And the other is your personal story. But we don't have to expand on too much on both of them. All right. So why do you think, and do you think, and why, that risk management has a spiritual dimension to it?
Okay. Number one issue is stewardship. We all, I'll use you, Sam. You are the steward of this podcast, among other things, right? But you're the steward of this podcast. You got a sign back here. You got some microphones. You got a table. You are the steward of this. Could you take a hammer and start beating on the table and the microphones? Certainly you could, but you wouldn't, because you're a steward and you recognize your stewardship of this experience. Yeah?
Yes.
In the same way, you wouldn't start cursing right now because you're a steward of this experience. Mm-hmm. All right? Mm-hmm. And you know that, and the church knows that, and we're all together on this. What we are is, our little catchphrase is, our ministry is to protect your ministry. We don't typically do ministry. We don't hold evangelistic meetings. We don't own a church. We don't build anything. What we do is we make sure that when there is a loss, that you, the minister, the steward of this ministry, gets your assets back. I always say that everything we do is designed to either preserve, protect, or restore your ministry assets. So if a vandal came in here and hammered up your microphones, we would replace your microphones. That's restoring ministry assets. If you can't afford health insurance, the church can't afford health insurance, we do the health self-insurance in order to preserve the assets. And then we train people to protect the assets, to do the right thing with regard to the assets, to not have the extension cords and that sort of thing. So that's what we do, and it's extremely spiritual. In fact, we have a secret at Adventist Risk Management.
Prayer.
That's not a secret. The secret that we have is that we have a kind of a secret goal. We want to be the most spiritual department of the General Conference. Because we know that what we do ministers specifically to you, the exposure creator, the person who's steward of these assets. And we always say there are three losses. Whenever there's a loss, there's three losses. There's the money loss. That's the obvious one. That's what everybody thinks we're here for. Time distraction loss. If somebody crushed your microphones, you'd be having to reshop for them. You'd have to be replacing them. You'd have to be plugging them in. You'd have to be wondering, why did this person come in here? That loss would engender all kinds of distraction for you from your ministry. And we don't need any of that. And then the last one is reputational loss. There's always a reputational loss, believe it or not. How come that church burned down? Who was asleep at the switch on that, you know? And so we have those three losses every time. And we want to avoid those where possible and restore them as quickly as possible when they are lost.
In that reputation management, that's the communications.
It is. It is.
You work very closely then with the
There's a whole thing called
department.
crisis communication, right?
Yeah.
And it's really, really important. I mean, we've been talking about it this week about different issues, right?
Yeah.
And it's really important that we message for the spiritual health of our ministries.
Wow. That's a solid foundation. It's the wing beneath the
That's it.
the wind beneath the wings of those that minister. I like that. Minimizing the financial loss, the time loss, and the reputation loss
Right.
of any.
And again, time and distraction. I mean, honestly, for those of us who are a little ADHD, right? I sit at my desk. I could be doing this, but I'm worried about that. Mm-hmm. It's not really time. I'm not needing to work on it right now, but it's just bugging me.
I remember when the British Union conference building burnt down. I was watching it burn, and it was devastating. It was heart-wrenching and emotional. And I also remember Victor Pilmer, a treasurer I deeply respect. His immediate reaction was, "I'm going to resign, and I'm not going to do this anymore." As in, the guilt and shame for having experienced it. And I remember...
And yet he didn't cause the fire.
No. And I remember the support from ARM in, no, we're going to rebuild this. It's going to be all right. And
it's going to be better.
I promise you, if you know Victor, he's not the kind to weep easily. Right? He is disagreeable and resilient, and he's the leader, you know.
Right.
And it shocked me because I never expected that from Victor.
Right.
But he was, and I know ARM helped to look up, and now we have a beautiful building now that is more capable of fulfilling the objectives and the mission of the church than before the fire. But it was a lot of stress and emotional drainage in that process.
And of course, when you see that, then you know one of the other problems with insurance in depth. You've heard of the morale and the moral hazard of insurance?
No.
So we have two different hazards of insurance. One is the morale hazard. So picture a person who works at another union nearby, sees this happen. They see the building burn down. They see it get built up better. What is their appetite for keeping their building safe? Maybe it would be good if ours burned. That's called the morale hazard of insurance. The moral hazard is the same guy who is morally compromised and says, "I think we need a new building. Give me a match." That's the moral hazard. So the morale hazard and the moral hazard. And so it happens. Auto is a really good example of it. I'm really tired of this car, and I know it's fully insured. So I'm going to go park it in the worst possible neighborhood and leave the keys in it. That's the moral hazard. Sometimes they bleed over, you see.
Yeah.
So,
which in the end game, it doesn't work because you're going to be paying much higher premiums for a much higher time.
Of course.
If you're the kind of person that behaves like this, medium to long term, which let's, integrity wise, which is some of the risk that you run, is the human element of integrity.
Yes.
People learn, especially very intelligent people learn when they are 7, 8, that they can get away with things.
Yes.
They can get advantages.
Lying works.
Lying works, right? So it's a phenomenal strategy for the immediate and sometimes
long term.
Medium.
Yeah.
But I've never seen it long.
Yeah.
So medium to long term integrity is a much better strategy that sets you up, and success may take a little longer, but when it comes, it's sustainable and it compounds.
Right.
So that's where I think the individual risk also matters, because if you have a person that lacks integrity and at some point you pick that up, either because of carelessness, which I think it's also a matter of integrity, being careless,
morale hazard.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So on that, it's interesting. We have found, continue to find that our church people and administrators are on the whole very, very scrupulous, to the extent that they are aware of the risk. right? Getting background checks on everybody who works with children. 15 years ago, nobody ever thought of it, right? But now they're made aware of it, and they're very scrupulous about it. They'll do it, right? At your church, if you work with children, you had to do it, right? Yeah. And so everybody is being really, really honest, except for people who we call bad actors. Okay, the church has bad actors in it. These bad actors are either addicted, mentally ill, or evil, right? And so we have those bad actors, and one of our jobs at ARM is to try to spearhead a solution to bad actors. Our problem is that we can't predict bad actors. There are, using child molesters as an example, there are many things that child molesters all have in common. If you want to get more in depth, we can talk about that. I don't know if that's where you want to go today. But the point is, we know they have them in common. But there are lots of other people that have many of those things too that aren't child molesters. So nobody's ever yet figured out how to predict child molestation, for instance, ahead of time. But we can predict subsequent child molestation. People who molest children once typically will do it again if they can. And so one of our big presses is to figure out how to prevent the church from giving access to people who are known bad actors. And so I spend a lot of my time brainstorming, working, tweaking policies to make sure that all of our churches have safety guards for reintroducing bad actors into their economies.
I have a lot of the complaints, and rightfully so, that people make is that bad actors just keep getting moved around. Yeah. So this is something that you have.
We work at all the time. Okay. Now, keep in mind that we're not the employer of these people, right? So we're working with our insureds who are the employers of these people. Okay. You know the word insureds. That's the people we insure.
Okay.
The entities we insure. Our entities that we insure are the people who do this. And there is a perception, because honestly, of the Roman Catholic experience, where that really did happen, and because of anecdotal experiences where at some point in time, somebody did something that was inappropriate, from just mildly inappropriate up to the worst, that then the victim knows didn't get fired. Okay, and that has happened. We'll be honest, that has happened.
Do you think it happens less?
Absolutely, it happens less. Let me tell you why. I used to defend these guys. I used to be a trial lawyer that defended pedophiles, okay? I defended pedophiles that had, on my defense, I'm working on them a second time, they molested somebody before, and the jury gave them probation. Okay? Startling, isn't it? But it happened. Okay? It happened. In that time period, I'm going to be honest with you, we didn't value women and children. And by we, I don't mean the church, I mean the society. I'm older than you. When I was a kid, if a young girl said to her parents, even her mother, Uncle so-and-so mishandled me, the general response was, you need to stay away from him. Now, that would never go today. But that's the way things were handled in those days. That doesn't make it right. You know, it's just like Thomas Jefferson. We want to villainize him for doing what he did in his era, right? And it was not right. I'm not saying it was right. I'm saying it was what that era did. And that's the same was true of all that. Today, we are advocating a pure zero tolerance. And that includes harassment and misuse of adults. Okay? a pastor who is inappropriately familiar with somebody who's not his spouse or somebody who's not her spouse. Most of the violators on this are men. It's a testosterone problem again, right? Those people, we want a zero tolerance. There are certain things that you can do that make you unfit to be in the Seventh-day Adventist ministry, period.
In any layer.
In any layer. Now, again, we saw problems in times past. I think we have unanimity on this across our hiring people today. I hope we have unanimity on this. I know lots of conference presidents who recognize it, but I'm going to tell you, it flows from culture and not the other way around. The Me Too movement and all that, here's where it comes from. And I'm telling you, I believe this with all my heart. It comes from a history of not valuing women. We tolerated it in times past in the same way we tolerated slavery, because we devalued. I believe those days are being eclipsed by an appropriate and healthy balance of valuing all people. We're in a different age. It's a better age. It's not a perfect age yet. But we value people, and we can't tolerate people being misused. And we preach this all the time.
Was the church better than society in those days, or are we just reacting?
I don't know. One of the current issues that we face is that many of these states are abolishing their statutes of limitations. And so people...
What is that?
The statute of limitations says if you are wronged, you have this much time, 2 years, 4 years, to file a suit. Sometimes when it's a child, it's X number of years past their majority or their 18th birthday, right? And states are realizing that there were people who got told, well, I know you think the pastor did something, but let's just not say anything, because that's what people said in the 1960s and 70s. And so many states are unveiling those limits and saying, make your action. Now, there's a problem because we insured those things in those days, if we insured them at all, for very small amounts. And so when they make a claim in 2023 on something that happened in 1974, there are no limits for that. So it's going to have to be the entity that's going to have to respond. And so this is a problem. But let me tell you, I believe that our administrators today are sensitive, and I believe that they almost unanimously value women in a way that we didn't value women in the 60s and 70s.
And not just women, I think
children,
people altogether, because a lot of this happened with men too.
It happened with boys to a lesser extent. It definitely happened. We didn't value that wrong.
Tell me about your experience as a lawyer. Because what you said was interesting. Let me give you some context to why I'm asking. As a pastor, the tension that people don't realize is that pastors know a lot about the people in their congregations.
Often more than they want to know.
Yeah, often. I've never been in a congregation that I don't know much more than I wish I did.
Yes.
So, I've had one young man who was attracted to children.
Sure.
Cry multiple times as if he lost a parent.
Right.
Is the greatest grief.
Sure.
Because he wanted to die. He would rather be dead than be attracted to children. He understood that he was a monster, and he no longer wanted to be a monster. And of course, you look in his background and you wonder how, the right question is, how are you a monster?
Yes. Why did this happen? Why?
Having known his background, the right question was, how come you're not much worse than this?
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So it's a different question.
Right.
And as a pastor, you're crying with him
Yes.
in this desperate soul that doesn't know what else to do.
Sure.
And morally, in my opinion, very few things more reprehensible,
Of course,
than wanting to sexually abuse children.
you can ruin their lives.
Right? And yet that's... So when you mentioned that you represented
Yes.
pedophiles, tell me more about that.
I practiced law in a small town. Many years ago, I worked here doing claims at Adventist Risk Management. And before that, I did claims for the Adventist Health System. But in the interim, I practiced law in a small town. And when you're in a small town, you kind of have to do everything. You're not in those tall buildings where they do one little thing, right? You're in a small town, people walk in, they need help. And so I also had to take appointments from the court. And so the court would give me these cases, and I would have to try these cases. Pedophiles are typically winsome, gregarious people. They're people that you wouldn't want to like. They wouldn't be very good pedophiles if nobody liked them, right? That's the image that people have of pedophiles is the creepy guy in the overcoat, right? But that's not the real pedophile. The real pedophile is the person who's always helpful at the Pathfinder event, or they're the ones that children are attracted to. So
and typically churches are more prone to have that environment because it's one of the last environments we have where
we interact on
multiple. In fact, we encourage multi-generational interaction.
The healthiest churches have the most of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I represented these people. You can't help but, they're my people. I've sworn an oath to help them. But there's so many of them that that what the outcome's going to be when the child testifies. It's case over. Mm-hmm. They still do need a defense. We don't stone people anymore. So they need a defense, and they have to go through that. And I helped many people through that situation and ushered them off to the prison.
As a pastor, I've seen a few pedophiles that attended my churches, too,
Yes.
in fact. And we talked about predicting and being incapable of prediction. But there are some things that you can do. So a mother came to me and said, I'm uncomfortable with the way this particular gentleman
is acting toward my child.
Is acting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I said, how do you feel when you see it? Right. I don't know. It just feels wrong. Now, here's what I've learned, and I encourage pastors to pay attention to this very closely.
Okay.
Every year, you should preach a sermon that encourages people to talk.
Yes.
And to talk to you because they trust you. And they trust you because you're going to do something about it.
Right.
So I had a sermon based on Judges 19,
okay,
also known as the sewage of the Old Testament.
Yes.
If you want to be horrified, go ahead and read Judges 19. You've got a Levite that has a concubine. They should not have concubines, but he has them. He has one, and the Benjamites, the tribe of Benjamin, want to rape her, and the whole story is just awful.
It's a horrible story.
And the point of the story is that it took the other 11 tribes a lot of effort and many deaths to end this behavior.
To root it out.
Right? So I preach about it, and I say, it will not, this is not a perfect church.
Right.
And as I often say, if you find a perfect church, don't join it because you're going to mess it up. There's no such thing as a perfect church. Yes. But in this church, we are not going to tolerate it. That zero tolerance thing.
Right.
And I do this every year because every year, and I prepare myself. I'm not traveling after that, and I waited a couple of months because those stories come up usually immediately that afternoon.
And if you were a woman, they would come up a lot quicker.
Yes, true.
It's our experience. When a woman pastor is on staff,
it happens much faster. Yeah. So I encourage that kind of conversation, because so that's one thing. The other thing that I discourage is the need for immediate proof.
Right.
Okay, so that mother would not have come to me
right
if I demanded that she tells me a story that incriminates the guy. The truth is, all of us have a sense for danger to some degree or another.
It's a great book on that. Have you seen it?
Blink.
Or is there another one? It's called The Gift of Fear.
No, I haven't.
The Gift of Fear.
Interesting.
I always say that we humans have unknown antennae.
Yes.
We have antennae, and they tell us so many things that we don't know that we're being told, but we can feel that we're being told.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there's a creepy feeling, honestly trust it.
Or at least pay attention to it. Right? So that's the, you gave me a book, I'm going to read it.
Okay.
I'll give you a book called Blink by Malcolm Gladwell.
I know him.
Yeah, great book. So it's this, you have an instinct for something.
Yes.
You're feeling something toward that. So in our team here at the General Conference, everybody knows they don't need to give reasons for what they feel.
Right.
So, and we have a sentence called instinct. It's like, what's your instinct for this?
Right.
And they will say, I don't know, I'm not sure. Okay,
right.
That informs me of something. It does not mean that you're just going to follow your feelings. Quite the opposite. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 of us discussing something for 2 hours to open the curtains, to try and peer behind the curtain, to find out where is that coming from? Why do you feel the way you feel? Because we need to articulate it.
Right.
For the best idea to win,
of course,
you need to articulate what that feeling is. So in this case, Mom comes to me and says this, and then I pray with her and I say, we'll do something from now on to see what will happen. So I talk to my elders. The people that I trust the most are the elders. And if it's not the case, then pastor, change your elders. Because if you cannot trust your elders, forget it. So I mentioned to the elders, there was this concern. Let's have a schedule that we're going to keep an eye on the situation and never leave this person alone, this guy alone with children.
The informal chaperone system.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great name for it. The informal chaperone system.
We have a formal chaperone system that we supply to churches when they have
events and in different ways. Okay.
A registered sex offender wants to attend.
Okay. I see.
We give them a formalized chaperone system where he signs and contracts that he's okay with that and he's going to participate.
I didn't know we had that.
Yeah.
I had my own form of it, but that would have been very helpful.
Yes.
So one of the elders, and we're just watching from a distance,
certainly.
And
that's the informal system.
Yes. One of the elders noticed that, and he was a helper in the Sabbath school department, for children's Sabbath school department. So it wasn't an easy thing. And he had 2 children of his own, and it was a solid family that had been there for a while. Yep. But the gut instinct, the antennae that you mentioned, it's important. So at some point, one of the elders noticed that he was having some activities with the children where he, the jumping around, and it was, it started off really well, but then he wanted to turn the light off as they were starting to jump. And at that point, I said, there is something here that we need to, my remit has ended. I'm not an investigator, I'm a pastor.
Right. So
then I called the Metropolitan Police in London, special line, and I told them, this is the situation, like this. And they gave me some counsel. Good. They did not start an investigation immediately.
Right.
They said, has he attended church for a while, and what's his story? So I told him the story. And they encouraged me to talk to other people internally because I would get much further ahead. Eventually I ended up talking to his first wife, who was no longer in the church, and she had lots of concerns about this. Is one of the reasons why she divorced him. And then I informed the police, and then they started the investigation.
Sure.
So now it was time for me to talk to him. Okay, so I called him and I said, brother so-and-so, this is what is happening. And I don't need to know from you what is the case. You don't need to tell me your life story. Right. You don't need to tell me anything. I'm just informing you that from now on, an elder will be with you at all times when you are in the church, while the police will investigate you, if they do. If they come back and say they investigated and there's nothing there and nothing, no concern, then we'll see what we'll do. But until that happens, nobody in the church needs to know. Right. I just need you to write me a letter saying that for personal reasons you are
going from the informal to the formal,
recruiting yourself from the church, the children's department.
Yes,
I'm not going to share with anybody why, because this is I don't want to expose you
certainly
unnecessarily, right? But this will stay between us if you want, and you write the letter. He wrote the letter, and then proceeded for the following weeks to tell everybody that I'm ousting him from ministry. Okay. So now I visited him again and said, you have forced my hand, and I will now have to share with the board the reasons why, right? It turns out he had an awful history of abuse before that, and his parents exposed him to sexuality in an awful way much sooner in life than they should. And again, the question is, I looked and I said, it should be much worse than this.
Right.
Okay. So the guy that I mentioned before was not this guy, it's another guy, but the same story.
Sure.
And eventually we had an official chaperone system that we had to establish, and so on and so forth. But this is the part that really I would like pastors to realize. The reputation of a church that has a pedophile attending, right? Because we have no standards for fellowship.
Right.
Right? We have no standards for fellowship, which means that pedophiles are welcome to come and listen to the sermon and be in the church. This will shock a lot of Adventists.
Right.
We have no standards for fellowship, but we also need to protect the community.
Of course.
Which means that chaperone system that you have. I didn't know about that. I think that's brilliant. And you would have thought that from that point onwards, the children's ministries department would just empty. And I thought in 6 months, we're not going to have one because all the parents are going to go away.
I see.
Once people know that there is somebody here, it will just empty out. But that's okay. We'll still deal with it. We'll pay that cost. Do you know what happened? In 6 months, we had double the number of children that were there before.
Interesting.
Because now parents felt safe.
Yeah.
This is a place that I can feel safe because the church is not willing to prioritize its image above the safety of my child.
Right.
And so the brand protection, if you will, we ended up with a much bigger trust in brand equity than before we dealt with it. And that surprised me a great deal. I did not expect that to happen. What is your experience of openly dealing with the bad actors?
A good public experience right now is that the Southern Baptist Convention has decided that they're going that direction. For years, you've read about it in the press perhaps, but for years they have, they're a congregational system.
Yeah, I haven't read it. Tell me.
So they're a congregational system, and so it's really easier in a congregational system for a bad actor over here to move over there, right? And so that happened. Turns out that there was a list up at the General Conference the headquarters office. And of course, theirs is different than ours. But they had a list of kind of bad actors, and they didn't tell anybody. And so that's a problem, right? And so they have, last year, published the list publicly. And they said, we want to come clean. We want to fix the brand. And so they're working on that. We have a system where the people that we have paid claims on, that we're willing to share. If a conference wants to hire somebody, they can ask us, and we'll tell them we paid a claim on that person. Is
there a better way to help with this? Because presumably, if you have the checks, the checks and balances, the background check,
right?
Would that come up in a background check, or not necessarily?
No, it doesn't. In the North American division last year, they made a new policy. You have to do a criminal background check on your employees as well.
Oh, so that's recent.
That's brand new.
Okay.
It's a really low hurdle. How many is that really going to catch? People who come to be hired as a teacher or a pastor, and they have a criminal history. That's going to be pretty rare, right? The next level is, have we had a claim in the past or paid?
Yeah, I was going to say, can we add that check to the process?
And we are. Of course, we do.
Okay, good.
that's still a pretty low hurdle. I mean, we haven't paid 1,000 claims. Okay.
Thank God for that.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Exactly. The claims are, a low number. I mean, more than you can count on your hand, but less than that big number.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's still a low hurdle. Here's our problem. Our problem is, how do we catch people who have had an allegation, but it was never investigated, and we don't know if the allegation was true or not, and then they come someplace else. And so that's what we're brainstorming and working on right now. That's the cutting edge of risk management, is how do we help to make sure that every allegation is taken seriously and can follow the person, so that when an employer is looking at the person, they can know, and then they can do their due diligence to see, is that an allegation one that we should worry about or not. The best predictor of future behavior is relevant past behavior.
Yes.
It's real simple. And then the corollary to that is the system that you have is perfectly designed to give the results that you're getting.
Of course it is. That's why you're getting it.
It may not be designed intentionally. It may have been evolved, but it's still designed.
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure that the system that we have evolved, is intentionally driven toward the exclusion of the ability of bad actors to be rehired.
Without overestimating who a bad actor is, because that will be the tension, right? So any flag is done. The person is done forever.
But yeah, we can't have that. I mean, honestly, because that way any person who wants to literally ruin someone's career for life can say one sentence and it's over.
And
so there has to be due process.
I don't believe that this is out of the realm of possibility. I think it's very possible that spiteful people who themselves are full of problems can accuse somebody of something, and so that should not be enough.
It should not be enough. So statistically, you need to know that north of 90% of accusations by vulnerable people are true. Okay? The reason for that is that for a normal, healthy person, making an allegation has no payoff. Okay?
Quite the opposite. There is a cost. There is a deep cost.
That's exactly right. It's a deep cost, a stigma, and all the rest. The blowback is painful. They'll cry just like the other bitter crier.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
The ones that are false, we can usually tell are false for a couple of reasons. We know they're mentally ill. Okay? Now, can mentally ill people make it correct, a true accusation? Of course they can, but that this is an indicator. So mental illness, vindictiveness, divorce proceedings, things like that all have a tendency to engender false claims. So of this world of 100%, the 3 to 6% that might be untrue usually have a visible cause.
Yes.
You with me?
Yes.
It's not like there's 40% that are untrue and we don't know why people would do that. It doesn't happen.
And also, bad actors are not single events either. So if you have one accusation, that's 90%. But if you have two, it compounds on the...
Where there's smoke, there's fire, that sort of thing. Yeah.
And then if you know, so...
Right.
I am so glad that we have an institution and a leader of that institution that has this in mind. I did not know this, James, at all. I knew that, of course, if I gave it some thought, I would have realized, yes, because ARM needs to pay.
It isn't because we need to pay.
But because you need to pay, because you need to pay,
it makes it our bailiwick.
You are thinking of it.
Right.
Right. So I'm not talking about the money. You understand?
Let me tell you a little story. So I got officers. We meet on a regular basis, weekly. And so my officers are, and I'm new. This is a while back. And I'm brand new. And a church burned down. And I looked into it and I found out, our conferences don't have to insure with us. It's voluntary. Okay, so they can insure with anybody they want.
Mm-hmm.
We have 90% market saturation in North America.
I like that.
But they can insure with anybody they want.
Mm-hmm.
This church burned down. Big, expensive church burned down. And I found out they weren't with us. And so I'm new, and I sit with my officers, and I say, hey, the church burned down, and it wasn't ours.
You're pretty happy you don't need to pay for it.
And they all looked at me with pain.
What's wrong with you, James?
What's wrong with you, James? We care when every church burns down. These people had a co-insurance clause. They're going to get kicked on this thing. They're going to get they're never going to get their church replaced. It's going to be a nightmare for them. This is our church, James. What are you thinking?
Welcome to the ARM culture.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so we sent our claim person to help that conference, to work with their insurer to maximize their recovery, because we know how that works.
That's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not the money, clearly.
It's not
money. So but you are involved. What I'm trying to say is you are involved in the process of some layer of compensation, and because you're involved in the process, you're paying attention to it.
Right.
You have a reason.
We are the experts in the church on this subject.
You see?
Absolutely.
So if I thought about it just a little bit, I would have come to that conclusion. I had not thought about it. And I am very glad that there are ways in which we could to some degree measure our culture and to see how much better we are, because we need to get better at this.
And I know, we could do this literally all day, but there are other organs in the church, other departments in the church that also take this very seriously and and just know that we have a policy for how to handle and investigate these claims, these claims that aren't claims, these kind of claims.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what we call them is allegations if they're not a claim.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So a person makes an allegation. We have a process. We have a policy for exactly how to deal with it. It's in the North American Division, shall I say, Red Book? The policy manual.
The policy book. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it tells the entity exactly what to do when there's an allegation against an employee. And if they'll follow through with it, and by the way, there's a delightful lady at the North American Division, and all you have to do is call and she'll walk you through the process. And so they have been taking this serious. They wrote that for years. They have been taking this seriously for years, and they have provided for it. Our goal, because we want the complete list, right? Our goal is to make sure that every entity follows through with that policy and does it.
Got it. Mm-hmm.
Because it's so easy to defer. It's so easy to say, well, he resigned and he's moved away, and so it's a done deal. And the person who made the allegation is happy that he's no longer a pastor and no longer a teacher, whatever. And so we're all right. But of course,
5 years from then, a lot of time
Bingo.
passes, and suddenly he emerges or
Bingo.
she emerges somewhere else. But usually it's a he.
It's almost always a he.
Yeah. Okay, James, thank you for that very in-depth and insightful conversation. I had not imagined that we would have that conversation, but I'm glad we did. So finally, tell me about your personal convictions, your walk with Christ, why you gave your life for him. I don't know much about you.
Yeah.
I presume most people don't either.
Yeah.
So tell me about,
it's
where
a simple story.
all of that comes from.
I grew up with a mother that was a Seventh-day Adventist and a father who was a decent fellow, an alcoholic, but a decent fellow. And he was brilliant. But I went to church. After going to college to study music, I realized that I really needed to be in the helping part of the world, and I wanted to help people. And so I joined the ministry. I went to Southwestern Adventist University and got a religion degree. They didn't offer theology in those days, it was religion. And I went to work for the Texas Conference. They wanted to send me to Andrews. I didn't really want to go to Andrews. And so I went to law school instead. So I quit, went to law school, but then I continued. They hired me back part-time, and I continued to serve in churches until I graduated law school. And at that point, I practiced law and volunteered at churches and did that for a long time. And then at one point I went to work as a lawyer for the Adventist Health System, handling claims. And another point I went to work for Adventist Risk Management, handling claims. And practiced law for myself and for Farmers Insurance and other people, and always volunteered at a church, list of them that I worked at. And then 2011, the Texas Conference had a pastor disaster and asked me to come and help a church. So I went and helped that church for a little while, closed my practice and went and helped the church for a little while, full time. And then from that anxiety, there was another church that had an issue, and so they moved me to the other church. And so I did that for a while, and God was good to both of those churches in healing. And then one day in 2021, my old boss from ARM, Karnik Dutmetsian, dropped my name to Alex Bryant, and they called me. And so on my birthday in 2021, I moved here. And if you look at the process, it almost looks like it was planned in advance.
I think there was somebody planning, because you have ministry, you have the health experience, you have the insurance experience, and that's why we had such a meaningful conversation today. Yeah. James, I would like you to finalize our longest A&N in-depth in history.
Sorry.
This is the longest. It's great. With a few words to local church leaders about risk, especially, and how they could minimize that risk.
First thing you could do is what you suggested, which is find that person in your church who has a passion for safety and for all this. There are those people. It needs to be a detail-oriented person that has a passion for this. They can be an introvert. They don't have to be an extrovert. Mm-hmm. We have many opportunities for extroverts, very few for introverts.
They can provide written reports if it's easier.
Exactly. And then have them trained on our website. Go to our website and do the training.
That's AdventistRisk.org, right?
It is. And we have training modules there, and for church risk managers. If every church had a risk manager, that would be the key. And so you have a risk manager. The risk manager takes the training. The pastor should take the training. And say there's one for pastors, one for risk manager. And then if you have more questions, we're available. We have a whole department for that, okay? And so we're happy to do whatever needs to be done. And if you need a site visit, we can even do that, okay? But the bottom line is awareness of the exposures is half the solution easily. If you know that there are pedophiles running amok out there, you know what to be careful of, right? Especially if you do a little training. If you know that allowing a 20-year-old to drive the Pathfinders around is a bad idea, right? That's why the insurance rates are so high. You really want the 40-year-old to be driving the Pathfinders around, okay? Mm-hmm. Somebody who's an experienced driver or who has a CDL or whatever, right? So just awareness is the answer. And then following through with it. Okay. Annual church inspections is a good idea too.
Thank you very much. Please pray for our local leaders to find that way forward. Could you pray for us?
Absolutely. Our Father in heaven, we're so grateful that you have given us the privilege of leading in your church. We ask now that you would create and appoint in all of our communities leaders who care about vulnerable people, about the stewardship of ministries, the stewardship of buildings, and the stewardship of people. Forgive us where we have failed. Please give our churches the awareness to be safe and to protect one another. And we ask that you help us to do it in unity. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. James, once again, thank you for coming and talking to us.
Super nice to visit with you. Longest visit I ever had with you.
Indeed it is. And thank you for watching. You stayed for over 2 hours. You deserve a prize. Thanks for tuning into this episode of A&N In Depth with James today, Winegardner from Adventist Risk Management. If you've enjoyed what you heard and you want to stay up to date with the latest episodes, make sure you hit the subscribe button, whether you are on Spotify or YouTube or iTunes or wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to tune in next week for more engaging conversations that will challenge us to grow and learn together.